I'm going to mute myself because the camera follows you and Bishop. We are recording this, and we will push the video out next week. Okay?
Thank you, Judge Groves. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
That's good. We're so thankful that you're participating in our Zoom conference and our ratings and endorsement process once again. And we're so thankful as you come through the primary that now you're one of those individuals who will be in the general election. Let me get right to the questions and I will answer yours. You do 8 questions. Your answers really just pertain to what you feel so that we can make sure we get an adequate background and knowledge of how you will work on the bench should you get to that office. So first of all, how will you help right the wrongs of a flawed criminal justice system that has preyed upon poor people and minorities?
Well, I think I've been doing that. I think, one, you have to recognize it. I think once you recognize it, sometimes people don't want to recognize it because I think with knowledge comes responsibility. I believe that I have been doing that, and I've been doing that for the past 20 years, close to 20 years as a judge, and I believe that I did it in private practice. But more importantly, to narrow it here as a judge, I've written opinions. I know that those opinions have impacted. I find people not guilty if the facts aren't sufficient that meets the high standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. I will call something out if it's not right, and I have the courage to do that. So I've been doing that. And I do think, though, that you do have to have the courage. And sometimes, some people aren't going to like it, but I think change requires a level of discomfort. Because when you feel the level of discomfort, that's when people know. So when I say, officer, you can't do that. That's why this flag sits behind me. And I have a responsibility. And I think that if all of us recognize the responsibility, because I think part of the problem is that all the branches have been complicit. When we look at it, when we talk about judicial reform, we can't just narrow it to the police. The prosecutor has a role, the judge has a role. And I think that part of it has to be that we have to recognize the power and responsibility. I think as judges, we have been relegated to referees. We're not referees. Our role is much more impactful than a referee to just call balls and strikes. Sometimes we got to say, you ain't even in the right game. And I think we have the responsibility to do that.
I neglected to ask you to just tell us a little bit about yourself. You got into that as you've answered that first question, but just give everyone a little bit more knowledge about yourself and your background.
I'm Emanuella Groves, and I have been in the city of Cleveland since 1978. I came here to go to law school. I met my husband, who was a third-year law student. I was a first-year law student, and we've been together ever since. We have 2 amazing children. And I think that, when you can see the fruit of our labor. My daughter is a lawyer, civil rights attorney. She has turned down opportunities to work in high-paying law firms. My son is committed to education. He works at a school that serves underserved children. He just got his master's from the University of Pennsylvania, and they both are graduates of Princeton University, which shows the core values of education in our household. I grew up in Canton, Ohio. I'm the 7th out of 8 children. We grew up with a role model and a standard of excellence. My brother won the 1968 gold medal. We impacted change in the city of Canton. When we hear these police cases, I had the opportunity to represent my mom in the case of Harris versus the city of Canton that is used to train police officers across this country because they have a responsibility, and it is the deliberate indifference standard that then imposes liability on the city. So as we talk about reforming the criminal justice system and just the system itself, it is pretty much ingrained in the fabric of who I am. And to be able to know my mom is now deceased. And even when we look at, the people who have been involved, their legacy lives on, even though the personal sacrifice is significant. My mom was arrested by the Canton police officer for a speeding ticket, taking my sister to school, placed in a paddy wagon, not in a police car. She was denied medical attention. It was in the jet. We went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And that's how it's been used to train. It was a $200,000 judgment. The case came back for trial after that, but by that time, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and passed. But the goal was not to get the money. The goal was to change the system and to recognize how she was treated was wrong. And so I know my responsibility that I have. And I think also you see, I think that the videotapes are allowing people to see that, sometimes things are hard to believe because you just don't believe it, but they're true. My brother who won the gold medal was arrested in the Cleveland airport, handcuffed to a chair, patted down by a dog. And when he sued civilly, the judge said, "Oh, I don't believe that," because there was no videotape. My brother has a tire dealership, and he's done very well. But at that time, when he was walking in the airport, they thought he was a drug dealer, which he was not.
So what new or different perspective will you bring to the court that you desire to join?
Well, I will bring a lens. I write already. I'm an adjunct professor at Case Western Reserve School of Law. I write opinions. I've written opinions since the time that I got on the bench, and I felt it was important to do that because I was committed to do what was right. And when you write, and if you can at least say, hey, she knows what she's talking about, what you do cannot be minimized. The decisions that you make cannot be minimized because with the writing and the teaching, it gives you some credibility. And so I would bring my 20 years of experience. I would bring the trial perspective too. Sometimes, I've gotten opinions back. I was almost like, you should have been there. You'd had a better understanding because sometimes what's in black and white does not always translate fairly. But I will bring that perspective of having been on the bench, already writing opinions, having an understanding, I think, of some of the weaknesses in the system. And I've worked hard to identify those. I think some of my opinions will show that. I've just written an opinion on Criminal Rule 5 in terms of cases being consolidated when they are felony charges, but sometimes they stay in the misdemeanor court and you have two proceedings over one transaction. So I have recognized issues along the way and I've written opinions. I found the RTA, fair enforcement practice, unconstitutional. That case was also cited in Pittsburgh. There's a newsletter in California that highlights cases that they think are transformative. That case is included in there. So I would bring that perspective of already having the lens and say, sometimes we have to examine the law. Sometimes we have to examine the practice and make sure that rights are being protected. And we have a separate role because there's supposed to be the accountability. And I will bring a continued commitment to have the accountability. And now the accountability will be with the judges that make the decision to hold them accountable to make sure that they have followed the law.
What do you see as the greatest obstacles to justice in the division on the court appeals level that you're seeking to be a judge?
I think some of it, certainly, there's the concept of precedence. And so even when we look at some of the things that we feel that aren't right, but there's a precedence, a legal precedence for doing that. But, we get stuck in precedence, we will still have Plessy as opposed to Brown. We will still have separate but equal. So laws do transform. And I think that, it requires a certain skill set. And sometimes I think you can look at how do you maybe still preserve the law, but you change the lens. And an example that I would give is an opinion that I wrote where a person was charged for filing a false complaint against a police officer. My instinct was that this has a chilling effect and it is going to impact whether or not people are going to feel freely to file a complaint. Because if they file a complaint and they say, hey, you just lied on the police, and now you're going to be criminally charged, now you will be victimized again if you felt that you were a victim of the powers that be. And so as I studied it, and I really felt that to my core, and this was pre-consent decree, that, how do we make people feel comfortable? Because that was another means in which to have the checks and balances of the system. But if you don't allow people to freely come and express their concern because they may be prosecuted, how do we do that? So I was not able to find, because the law did not support finding it having a chilling effect. So at least I felt, well, I can put the brakes on. I can say, what, the form that was used is not a complaint pursuant to the criminal rules. and therefore it's not a sworn affidavit, and the case was dismissed, which then put the ball in the city's court. And then the city could have decided to change the, excuse me, let me make sure my phone is off. The city could have changed the form and made it an affidavit, but they chose not to. And no complaint of that nature has been filed since. So that was changing the lens. That was looking at in a different way. And therefore it was able to discontinue charges being filed against citizens who felt that they were mistreated by the police.
Do you believe there's an underrepresentation of people of color in the justice system? And if so, how would you to solve this problem?
I guess it depends on which side of the justice system you're looking at. Because if you come in my courtroom on a given day, we are very well represented. We are overrepresented. So if you mean on the other side of the bench, certainly we need to have. And
basically, yeah, go and answer that.
I mean, we need to have. I am on the Stokes Scholars Committee through the Bar Association, which is an effort to get more people of color involved in the legal system, at, sending them through the system, having mentors so that they will go to law school. I think that we have to look at having more judges on the bench. The race that I just came through, I spent a decent amount of money. I didn't spend the most, which is interesting. The people who spent the most lost, but it's expensive. It's not cheap to run a campaign successfully unless you have certain names that are worth 50,000 votes from the start. So when you put your name on, you know that that's worth 50,000. So I think that, we have to look at how we can begin to really encourage people to run, have them understand that there is a cost and the ability to raise funds in order to, and certainly you can have a grassroots effort. But, this last pandemic, that last month, I'm like stir crazy because I couldn't get to the people. So not being able to get to the people physically, because you can't tap every voter. I got 50,000 votes. I didn't meet 50,000 people, but I was able through mailing and also using social media and the other means of tapping and meeting people and letting people know that I was a viable candidate and wanted to serve them, that I used other means. But it is costly. But we do have to, one, again, recognize it, and then two, undertake efforts to how can we increase that representation on the bench, particularly when we know that there's an overrepresentation through the criminal justice system of African Americans.
With that, what is your vision for the future of our judicial system? And as you would sit on the Court of Appeals, if you are elected, what changes would you advocate and why would you advocate?
In terms of changes within, again, I think it's going to be, looking at the lens. When we look at, sometimes it's just a perspective as a judge, whether or not the standard is met for a reversal or for upholding. So I think that part of that has to be bringing in that sensitivity. I think that when we see now in this day and age, because a lot of cases is he said, she said, so who do you believe? And in those instances, you have to give the finder of fact the benefit because they had the opportunity to actually see and hear the person. But sometimes you still can look at whether or not there is that level of credibility that we're looking for. And so a lot of cases are based on that. I think that there's continue to look at, particularly with wrongful convictions, identifying those areas of that results in that. Sometimes it is the attorney didn't properly engage. Sometimes it's just like, who do you want to believe? And so I think that at least bringing a perspective, my own personal perspective, I would have never imagined, as hard a family work, that my mom and my brother would have been brought into the criminal justice system. And so I think that I will bring that lens too, that sometimes, you can get caught up and people will say, oh, you'll never see me in your courtroom. And it's like, well, you don't know that. You can be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or deal with someone who has the authority and they make the decision, that you get caught up in the net of the criminal justice system. So having that understanding is important. And I will bring
You're
that.
elected, how would you use power? Is that it? Jerry, was that you? Okay, never mind. If elected, how would you, I keep hearing somebody. Okay, if you're elected, how would you use the power of the bench to bring about important changes to a judicial system that disproportionately affects people of color?
I think that, I serve on 2 national committees. I serve on the Bar Association. I think that, the more the greater role you have in the criminal justice system, I think it helps to make your voice a little louder. And I think that it gives a platform in which to deal with issues that we need to address. I'm on the executive committee with the Ohio Judicial Conference. I'm the only African American in the room. I supported issue 1. And as I said, I supported issue 1 in a room full of judges from across the state. No one else said I do too, but that didn't matter, because at least it let the people know in the room that we don't all think alike, and that there's a recognition that there are some challenges in the system, and we need to look at how can we provide the services. We don't need, in issue 1 was dealing with, drug cases, and if they should all be felonies or misdemeanors, and there was an effort to try to make them as misdemeanors. And so I think that, I will bring that voice. But I think that, people ask, and by the end of the meeting, I had an opportunity to talk to the Chief Justice one-on-one in terms of, and especially she knew I was a mental health court judge. But I think that we can change behavior, and we don't have to put, the foot on the neck. We don't have to do that. And I think sometimes the heavy-handedness in which we bring people into the system, keep them in the system, does not give us an opportunity to impact and have the change that we're looking for. And I know that through my mental health court docket, through my sentencing, I don't have the foot on the neck. I believe that we can reach people as opposed to the foot on the neck, with our hands extended and letting them know that there are opportunities available to help them right the wrong and help them change the trajectory of their life.
I want to ask you this question, and I know what you're going to say, but do you think that since you've written opinions, and because you have had opinions public, do you think that there are times that, or would you be approached about voting with partisan politics, or would you vote judicially and through justice to make sure that it's administered properly?
I think, being a judge, you don't vote on what's popular. You vote on what's right. I serve, and I know that I'm responsible to the people, but I also know that I am responsible to the God that I serve. And I think that He empowers me to make the right decision. And sometimes it may not be popular. I've made decisions that haven't been popular. I made decisions that people may disagree with, but I know at the end of the day, every night, I sleep well, because I know that I put my heart and soul into decisions that I make. I care about the people. I care about every case, every day. I clean the slate. I start all over, and I'm hopeful every day. And I hope that, the people that come before me can feel my heart and know my spirit, that it is not to bring them harm. It is to hold them accountable, because that's where the checks and balances have to be. And that's on both sides. Hold the prosecutor accountable, hold the police officer accountable, hold the defendant accountable. It's about the checks and balances. Because if you don't, then there is no accountability. And I think that that's what we're seeing at the national level. There's a separation for a reason. And it's not based on popularity. It's based on your personal character and strength, and the understanding of who you
like to say to,
excuse me?
Okay. Anything you like to say, wrap up?
Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity. I appreciate this process. I think that it is unique in the aspect that the lens, again, because the perspective is a little different. It's not only about what you have done, but it's about who you are. And I appreciate the opportunity. I know as I fill out the questionnaire, it's an opportunity of reflection. And like the question of who you are. Some people can't answer that because they haven't really examined themselves. So it's about self-examination. And I do want to do better. I want to be better because I know if I'm better, the system is better. And through the 20 years that I've had of serving, I know that I've impacted the system and I've impacted countless lives. And I think if given the opportunity to serve on the Court of Appeals, that would be able to impact in a different way.
Thank you, Judge Groves, for
Thank you so much.
participating with us, and God bless you. Thank you so much.
God bless you.